Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're continuing our series of bringing horses up into the working trot. And here we are with Miracle, showing you him lunging just once again without any side reins whatsoever. You all remember Miracle. He was the horse that was bought by one of our students, Abigail, who discovered the horse. He was only 2 years old when she bought the horse, and she bought him off a man who just had him tied to a post who was beating him bloody, essentially, and she bought him off him for $250 and has brought him along all this time. So you can see how beautifully he's starting to move, how long the neck is stretched out in front of him. This horse at 2 years old was already sway-backed. He was pretty much completely out of his mind from the abuse that he had gotten. And it's really taken quite a while. But even if you just look at his eye here a little bit, and you just see how much more relaxed he is about everything there. You know, he actually looks at people now with interest as opposed to that withdrawn look that he was one of those horses that was just, you know, God knows what had happened to him. I mean, he was only 2 years old when Abigail bought him. And as I said, he was already sway-backed and, you know, was having been beaten nearly bloody. And so it's taken quite a while to bring him around. But look what a beautiful horse he's turned into. If you'd seen him, as I said, if you go back and look at the old videos of him, you'll see how sway-backed he was. He was completely broken over in the neck. He looked like a horse that was just made of many, many different parts of different horses. And you can see now that he's starting to look like one horse. He had an extremely long neck. No one knows what his breeding is. Something that came off the range. He may have even been a wild horse at some point or something. Hard to say from where he came from out in the desert in Nevada. But look how beautifully he's fleshed out now. If you'd seen him a couple of years ago, you would have thought there was no hope for this horse. But look what a lovely creature he's turning into now. And you can see that neck has really come out long. You don't see the break in it hardly at all anymore. He was extremely broken over, this horse. His neck was just like a pencil-thin kind of thing that came off of his body and, you know, almost like a rubber band. But how beautifully his top line is developed. You see behind the saddle there how that's all filled in. This horse was extremely sway-backed when we started him. And just kind of, he also paddled a great deal in front. And you can see now that he's beginning to work over his back more consistently, you're really not even aware of that any longer. Whereas he used to look like his front legs were egg beaters, you know, making circles here. But look how beautifully you can see the top line, how beautifully he's swinging through behind on the same plane with the front legs. Everything that we talk about, how nicely developed the top of the neck is starting to be now. Now, of course, the danger will be when we hook the side reins on this horse because he was so severely broken over the neck, is that danger of him continuing to break over his neck as soon as we put some kind of contact on him, that is with side reins. But this would be the prerequisite before we start to bring them up. It's like I've shown you with all the others, they have to be working all the way down the stretch in all three gaits. Then we can think about testing whether they're ready to come up or not by putting the side reins up higher off of the D-rings on the top of the horse's, the saddle, which is what we're going to do now. So you can see how everything is going really well here, exactly how we'd like to see him lunge. The neck is out long, he's swinging nicely over his back. Quite a good rhythm here and length of stride. So that's exactly what we'd like to see before we think about bringing them up. So now she's going to take a moment here and connect the side reins. So now we've done that, we can see with the long side reins on, he still stretches out beautifully and stretches into the contact with the side reins, exactly what we're looking for to have happen. Now, if we hook these on and he just became, you know, went completely behind the vertical again, we'd know that this was not ready, it was too soon for him, but his neck seems to have healed enough now that he's able to stretch forward and down. Someone was asking me yesterday to have a horse that flips their head quite a bit and that sort of thing while they're working them. And once again, I was explaining how that is always a part of that thing of being broken at the neck. Zoolander was a horse who did that extremely, like head flipping, where they almost like they flip their lower lips even. It's kind of a funny thing they do, but that's a nerve damage. That's the nerve damage that happens in the neck causing that. But the only way to correct it is to do just what we're doing here, is getting the horse to stretch that whole neck out and giving that neck the time to heal up. Remember what's happening there when horses are broken at the third or fourth vertebra. We say broken, they're not really broken. It's just the ligaments that hold the spine together have been overflexed, so we actually have a loose spot in the horse's spine, so to speak, where the vertebrae have pulled apart. So you can imagine what happens there. You've all had a pinched nerve sometime in your life, I would imagine, how you can get those zings through your whole body when you hit one. And that's exactly what is happening to a horse. So when you have that pinched nerve there at the third or fourth vertebrae, it's going to cause them all kinds of problems. But look how beautifully now he's stretching into that contact. Good, consistent rhythm. Swinging nicely through behind. It's just taken a lot of waiting to get here, but that's what it always takes, folks. So just know that it's always going to take a year and a half to a year and a half to 2 years, even with some of the ones that are extremely overflexed in the neck. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ride them. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy the process. It just means you have to leave them there until the neck heals up. Because if you start to bring the neck up and they curl over at the third or fourth vertebrae, you simply know that the horse is not healed yet. I mean, if any of you have ever pulled a ligament, or a tendon, you know how much more difficult it is. They say that it takes much longer for a ligament to heal than it does for a bone, for instance, because it's just so much more difficult. So once ligaments get stretched out, it just really takes quite a while before they're going to get healed. So we just have to give that horse that time for that to happen. But as I said, it doesn't mean that you're not riding the horse or doing anything with it throughout all that period of time. It simply means you're going to ride them in a stretch for a lot of that first year and a half or so until that gets healed up. And once again, how nicely he stretches into the contact here. So what we did there was shorten the side reins a little bit. So now we brought him up a little bit. So we're putting a little more we've shortened the contact is what I'm trying to say here. So we've given him less room to stretch out, so to speak. So he's got to really stretch into that contact. So we've taken up all the slack out of the side reins. Now notice how the horse can pull his head up. So you can see when the side reins are connected like this, they don't stop the horse from throwing its head. The horse could throw its head straight in the air at any time that it wanted to. So by putting the side reins on this, it kind of proves the point that the horse is ready to do this, because if he weren't, as this horse was when he first came to us, his head was just straight in the air all the time. He was extremely difficult to get into the stretch. But you can see now he totally understands that and stretches into the contact. So that's about as short as we'd want them. Any shorter than that in the reins, he probably would start to come behind the bridle a little bit. But that's about what we're looking for there. You can see even there is almost a tendency to want to come back just a little bit. But you can see how with the side reins correctly adjusted like this and off of the top, then they come at an angle just like would be the same angle that the reins would come to if your hands were held in that same position. So the horse gets out of the idea of being held down with the side reins, and that's why, you know, when we would never want to shorten the side reins when they're on the side of the horse, because of course if they're on the side, all they're going to do is pull the horse over. So many people that we see who are trying to get their horses on the bridle, and what they're really doing, I mean, they have this idea that lighten the horse, but what they're really doing is pulling down so hard. They're pulling the horse over with the bit. They're pulling the horse onto the forehand. You can see how even here in the canter, how he stretched out beautifully into those side reins in the canter. So once again, this tells us that he's ready to do the work at this level because he can do the work at this level. So how nice that was. And once again, look at this horse's eye. You know how he comes up, he's looking around. This horse had a totally checked out look in his eye when you saw him. He was either freaking out about something or he just, you know, looked like he was off on another planet someplace. Now he stands there nicely. Actually, he's looking at me over there with the camera. But, you know, he has this nice look on his face like he's interested in things now, not like he's just so withdrawn. You know, when you see horses that just, they don't focus on anything, they're very withdrawn. That's usually horses that have been trained terribly and with, you know, forceful, brutal methods that have left them kind of zoned out, even if they are rideable, but they have this kind of checked out look in their eye. Once again, look how thick this neck is. Go back and look at some of the older videos of him. This horse's neck when he first came here was, you know, like a pretzel. And it was about as big around as my forearm. So look at how much muscle he's put on the time that he's been here. So he's been in training for about not quite 3 years, but probably 2 years, something like that. 2.5. But I said he was a very extreme case. But he was a very young horse, so look at him now. You know, he's probably only about 6 or so now, and he's turning into a lovely animal. Same thing here with the canter. He's able to stretch forward, able to stay over his back really very nicely. Look how stable the back is. Remember, that's what we talk about. And, you know, he's going to have his moments like there. So we'll show you one where he still has his moments where all of a sudden he just has a little meltdown there for a moment. But he goes right back to work. Now, in days of past, that would have been a half-an-hour long thing of him, you know, kind of going out of his mind once he decided to do so. And you can see how disconnected he became all of a sudden when he did that. And you could also see that the side reins, when connected like this, didn't stop him from throwing his head up in the air, if that's what he decided he was going to do. Not really sure what he decided to look at, but, you know, that's the way horses are. Sometimes we spend a lot of time conjecturing about why they do things. They just do them because they haven't quite settled yet. And that's the case with this horse. Whenever he does anything, it's just, you know, something triggers his old patterns of how he used to behave. And the way we deal with that is just to ignore it and go right back on, right back to work, just like you see him here. And once again, we come back and try the canter. See how nicely that looks again there, stretching forward into the contact with the canter. And notice when the horse canters over its back, as you see this one, look how stable the back looks. So you can imagine if you had to do anything from the back of a horse, how easy that would be if the horse were stable over its back like that. For instance, if you were a polo player, if you were running on the racetrack, for instance, how important that is. Or if you're a 3-day event rider, how important to be able to gallop with your horse over the back. So it keeps the horse from going down when it steps in a hole, for instance. In other words, getting a horse over its back is what makes them 4 square. That is like a 4-wheel drive vehicle. So they can handle undulating ground and this kind of thing because they're balanced on all 4 legs. I've seen so many horses, you know, in my fox hunting days and go down because people didn't realize, you know, a lot of people ride in rings and they don't, you know, because they're riding in good footage all the time. They're not aware of what can happen if the horse just steps in a little hole when your horse is upside down. So you've tried riding out cross country. I mean, how many horses I've seen just go down on their heads with people out in the hunt field because they just are so out of balance and strung out. So a horse that's working over his back is a safe horse, and that's one thing we always got to keep in our mind. That's a horse that is balanced on all 4 legs. So here in the new direction, you see him have one of his little temper tantrums that he was prone to happen. That still happens every now and then with him. And notice how she just goes right on, just puts him right back to work. So even after all the time he has, once in a while, he'll have one of his a little tantrum, so to speak. And now that kind of used to be how he went along all the time. It would take an hour or so just to settle him down. Now, if he has a little moment like that, he comes right back to work and settles right back in. And notice that that's all she did. She didn't make a big deal out of that. She just put him right back to work. She also didn't reward him. And so often people make the mistake of when a horse does do something, you know, freaks out or something, they're immediately, oh, good boy, settle down. And that's not the thing you want to do because then you reward them for that. So if they find out by accident, for instance, if a horse bucks somebody off by accident, then they find out they can do it, then you've got a problem on your hands. So in his case, when he has his little spaz out, we just come right back to work and put him right back to work. So the only thing that ever gets rewarded is good work. But on the other hand, we're not going to brutalize him for that little bit either. And once again, the canter looks pretty good here. Not quite as good as in the other direction. But not bad. He's still keeping the neck out quite well. A little hollower there. You can see him begin to lose impulsion and just kind of, you can see how the back kind of begins to sink when he does that. That is, he stops coming through behind. So the canter on this side is a little more difficult than this canter on the other side. And he's a little less balanced. You can see here in this direction, he doesn't just stretch into it as consistently as he does in the other direction. But that's coming around quite nicely now. Notice the deeper he stretches down, the more flexion he gets in the hocks. And that's looking quite a bit better there. Notice how she wrapped that rein up as she approached the horse. Keeps it up off the ground, is what she just did right there, which is what you always want to do. You never want to have those lines down around the horse's feet. So here we've taken the side reins just a little bit shorter, and we're going to see how that affects him in this direction. Now, once again, you can see in this direction it's a little more difficult for him. He doesn't just stretch as automatically as he does in the other way, but there it's going pretty nicely there. So we certainly wouldn't want to shorten them any more than that for him, and you can see how he's still a little inconsistent there. Trot's still a little up and down. That is, he brings the head up and hollows a little bit. Doesn't quite get into it as consistently as he does in the other direction. And has just a little bit more of a feeling like when you look, like there it looks quite good. He's starting to swing through pretty good. But we can see that that shorter rein at times he's having a little difficulty figuring that out. That is, without coming up and breaking too much. But that's not bad right there, as long as he's not curling behind the vertical and we're not seeing that break in the neck. So that's pretty good. We wouldn't want the reins any shorter than that. We can see when he goes all the way down, he still has a little bit of tendency to want to curl back a little bit. But that's pretty good. But we certainly wouldn't want to bring them any shorter than that. So that's about right for him. And even there, we're experimenting a little bit just to see where we can get to. So now she'll go in this direction. Once again, we always want to do everything in both directions. And we see how much easier this is for him on this side. Once we go this way, we can see that he evens out a little more, stretches a little more consistently. So we can still see there's that little bit of difference between the two sides of the horse yet. But that's not bad. He's staying up quite nicely. See this trot get a little short there as he comes around that corner, which of the hind legs kind of fell out behind. So always watch whatever the head and neck is doing is how it affects the rest of the horse. If the head comes up, almost always you'll see the back end fall out behind. So you see there he has a little tendency to curve back, so that's why we wouldn't want to bring these reins any shorter than that. Any shorter than that, he'd kind of curl up a little bit. So for him, that's about it. Now, of course, we'd go through this process every day, always starting with them quite long and then shortening them up as we go, instead of just putting them on right away short, the way we see so many people doing. You always want to take time. Let the horse warm up in the full range of its motion before we start putting anything that restricts that motion at all, or that has the potential to restrict it, like putting on side reins. So as we change things and we try to bring the horse up in front, our goal is to keep the horse moving behind in the exact same way, that is, over its back. You can see there he wants to curl up just a little bit. But that's quite nice. He made a nice downwards transition back to the walk. Didn't curl up too bit. So now what we're going to do is we've begun to do just a little bit of piaffe on this horse. And what I want to show you here is how, you know, we have to think of the piaffe as a developmental exercise, that just getting a couple of steps of it will help the horse a great deal. So Amber's done this a few times before with the horse. And remember, all we're looking for in the beginning is just to get this horse to step up and lift up a couple of diagonal pairs and push off the ground a little bit. That is, to push off the diagonal pair rather than to just lift his legs up. So this horse is at a point where it's light enough in the bridle. Remember that we can start this. You'd never want to start this if the horse hasn't accepted contact with the bridle. But sometimes with horses like this who've had a difficult time finding their back, so to speak, because he was so hollow. Just a couple of steps of Piaffe is all it takes to help them get a little more engagement, which we'll see when we put him back on the lunge line. So you see how he tries to step back. He's trying to understand what it is that she wants. Now watch right here as he comes, boom, a couple of steps forward. That's what we were looking for. He lifted those diagonal pairs a couple of steps, and that's all that we were looking for right there. And it was moving forward, so that's why I had her stop right there. Now let's put him back on the lunge line and see what that looks like. There we go. So we see after just a couple of steps of Piaffe how the horse's trot slowed down a little bit. He's consistently into that stretch, but it's slowed down, and now it has a little bit more lift than it had before. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit more. I see a little more lift. That is, he's pushing off the ground with the hind leg just a little bit more in the trot, which is giving me just a little more suspension. That is, he's starting to get the front end off the ground a little bit, like right about there. Now notice he's also stretching nicely into the contact and not having to be down so low, and yet still maintaining the same trot. So just a couple of steps of Piaffe, like right there, looks really nice for him. It's a little bit slower, a little deeper, and a little more lift. So a couple of steps of Piaffe can do wonders for the horse's gaits. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride with my associate trainer Amber Matusik. We will see you next time.